Welcome to Women Lead, a production of the Women of Color Empowerment Institute. We are live from the Riverside Hotel on Fort Lauderdale's Las Olas Boulevard. We are your hosts. I'm Kathy Eggleston.
I'm Bernadette Norris Weeks. Imagine that men and women come from two different planets. When you think that way, suddenly it's easier to understand why men and women tend to communicate differently, behave differently, and have different emotional needs. That is the basis of the book written many years ago by John Gray called Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus.
Among other things, the book discusses the primary differences between men and women and gives comprehensive advice for dealing with miscommunication, showing support to your partner in the way they behave, and being more fulfilled with your relationships. Today, we'll discuss whether these same differences exist when it comes to professional relationships. Is it true that men and women think differently regarding leadership roles? You be the judge after hearing various scenarios and leadership styles from successful state and national leaders.
Yes, Kathy, we are pulling from the archives today. We had the pleasure of interviewing a number of friends who happen to be high-level leaders on their thoughts about whether men and women lead differently. Some comments will surprise you and will include nuggets on how women can lead more effectively. The panel discussion was very informative. It was moderated by a friend of the Institute, Juliet Rulek of FPL. On the panel, you will hear from Judge J. Michelle Childs, the newest member of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia, Gregory Hale, who is the president of Broward College, powerhouse attorney and WOCEI charter member Ricardi Jackson, former mayor and attorney Andre Pierre, Yvette Simmons, Esquire, who is a former president of the National Bar Association, and Eugene Pettis, a former president of the Florida Bar Association. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after these messages.
This is James.
Jimmy!
Mom, Dad, this is James.
Jimmy!
James? James Harrison from Roosevelt High?
Jimmy! Jimmy! Oh! You good, Jimmy?
The 2021 Toyota RAV4.
Jimmy!
The RAV for all of you. Right now, lease a new 2021 Toyota RAV4 Elite for just $249 a month for 36 months. Toyota. Let's go places.
At the Women of Color Empowerment Institute, our mission is to enhance and expand leadership by women of color. We do this in a variety of different ways, including but not limited to providing mentorship opportunities for young professionals where we assist in helping to create paths to leadership. We empower women to develop capacities for social change. We produce programs that promote heritage awareness, and we provide training opportunities for business and government. Our institute holds seminars focused on professional success techniques, and we host many other events such as our popular Advocates for Change and Leaders Connect. The Women of Color Empowerment Institute publishes a magazine called Women Lead. Our signature event is the Women of Color Empowerment Conference, a yearly conference where hundreds of leaders gather from all across the United States and beyond. To learn more about membership and how you can support our programs or be a sponsor of the Women Lead TV, visit us at nationalwomenofcolor.com. Again, that's nationalwomenofcolor.com.
The law office of Austin Pammies Norris Weeks Powell is a full-service law firm practicing in the area of governmental law, including the representation of municipalities, civil litigation, personal injury, real estate, and corporate transactional matters. With over 100 years of collective experience, our attorneys are admitted to practice before state courts, federal courts, and the United States Supreme Court. We are conveniently located in downtown Fort Lauderdale and can be reached at 954-768-9770. Or for more information about the law firm of Austin Pammies Norris Weeks Powell, visit our website at apnwlaw.com. That's apnwlaw.com.
Welcome back to Women Lead. Today, we are exploring whether men and women have different leadership styles with a panel of powerhouse leaders. we pulled this jewel from the archives. Let's jump right in with a former Women of Color conference panel from our archives to hear about leadership differences when it comes to planning and attention to detail. Here's Judge Childs.
Women, in my opinion, tend to be much more detailed in their planning. They also are people who wish to get the job done from a big picture level. So that takes a lot of planning and a lot of details, as you can see all the details even going on with planning on this conference. They like to also engage, which is very effective because there's a participatory leadership style in the sense that people will work with them, coordinate with them, and then they allow other people to rise as leaders within their project. They are also very comfortable, in my opinion, just being very approachable. And I'll tell you a little bit, all of us will probably talk about our perspective just from the standpoint of what we do. As a federal judge, I'll interview lots of people, and in fact, this was the first time I signed on to what we call a system called Oscar, where you actually go online as a federal judge post. So this last year was the first time I did it, and I had over 200 applicants. It was very clear to me that women were so much more detailed in how they presented their resume. Of course, I'll check behind you and go on LinkedIn and your Facebook accounts and things of that nature just to kind of see who you are. And they didn't just have gaps all around. They actually added in and filtered in to those types of things because you don't know who's looking at you. I mean, you consider some things private, but a lot of things are public. I also noticed that there's a lot more follow-up, whether there's a thank you letter or some type of call to Chambers to have communication with myself. And for the first time this year, I usually don't let people have to fly in, you know, if they're coming from around the country and things of that nature. I'll just Skype you because, you know, I want to save the students money. But the women were willing to just get in front of me. And so I thought that was kind of interesting because they wanted to make sure that there was that personal connection. I will assume merit, but then you also have the interesting engagement because in Chambers, when you're in our solid, sacred space, I have to like you. I have to want to be around you. So I felt like they were also much more conversational, personal in terms of their relationships, and you just felt more of a connection in that regard.
Let's hear from former Florida Bar President Eugene Pettis on stereotypes and perceptions of leadership styles.
I don't think we can succeed in various tasks with one style. I think I have multiple styles of leadership. I think what's really important and what our takeaway from this discussion should be is recognizing our own style and understanding the need to adjust and adapt that style in the given organization and the given tasks that you may have. Because every style doesn't work in every situation. And if you're going to be, you know, bullheaded and I'm going to be this way no matter what, that's when we run into problems, male or female. That's when we run into problems. We recognize all the stereotypes, and for every stereotype of a woman, there's even more stereotypes for a black female.
Wow. Wow. That is something else. Well, it isn't far from true, I'll tell you that, because of black females, when it comes to us, there are many stereotypes that are out there, and we should unpack it. We should unpack it. I can think of a few words, probably the nicest of which is angry. That's the nicest, but we've heard a lot of other words, and I think we should look at changing the perceptions and trying to hear from other leaders on some of the things that they have been doing to try to change perceptions. Well, Juliet Rulak gave us some great examples, or a great example of how she changed herself given perceptions that others may have of her, and this is a really interesting example.
You mentioned that we should be looking at how we perceive ourselves, right? And so that is often something that women that are leaders often do because they're conscious of how they're perceived by others. I think much more so than men. So I'll give you a simple example, and I think some of you may or may not share this. For instance, I am just a nurturing person. I tend to mother people. And so when I go into a meeting, for instance, and there's a pitcher of water in the middle of the table, it is my immediate thought to pour this water for everyone sitting. I just think it's a nice thing to do, makes everybody comfortable. But then I remember the day when I went into that room and I thought, I better not pour this water because somebody's going to think, you know, I feel like she's a subservient or she thinks she, you know, she is not going to be on our level. And those are things, just as an example of ways that, you know, I changed my natural self because of a perception that I would be seen as weak or lower than or less than.
External and internal perception, how you feel about having confidence in the kind of leader you want to be. Let's listen to Jean Pettis.
With all the comments that we've been making, which I agree with, and anything Judge Childs says, I'm going to agree with, you know. And Bev, McCarty, and Julia, I think they really weighed this thing heavily to the right over here. So me and my brothers here, you know, we're going to agree to everything. Y'all come to the men's conference the next time. But I really wanted to lead with that thought, Juliet, that it's just not the perception that society has of ladies as leaders. One of the biggest pieces is how ladies perceive themselves and believing you belong and being able to adapt no matter what the forces are out there, because there are going to be forces. When you want to be a leader of anything, there's going to be pushback.
Here again from Judge Michelle Childs.
We have to be visionaries, and this is a distinction between men. They've got a plan. When you're running for judge, and you can attest to this event, even the American Bar Association, they know who's going to be president for the next 10 years. And we as women have to get in where we fit in and just kind of create a gap, like, oh, there's the 5 white males, let's now get somebody in. And it's like, oh, they can do that, despite qualifications, despite all these other things. So mentor, but then look forward. What is it that you're trying to achieve? And you have to apply for that job that you have 8 of the 10 criteria because you just don't know. I mean, you can go somewhere, and I always tell young people, somebody invites you to lunch, you turn it into an opportunity. You turn it into an interview. It's not just lunch anymore. You have to see what you see for yourself and how this opportunity can be created for you. So make sure you also have the vision going forward about where you'd like to be. And a lot of times that takes planning. Have somebody who's your mentor, and your mentors can be of various fields, personal mentors, personal life coaches, people in other firms, things of that nature, and look at your resume. Where are those weaknesses? Where are these spots that you need to build along the way so that you know what it takes to get those places? But definitely mentor, but look forward, be visionaries.
I think what President Greg Griegel has to say about leadership and his children is really interesting.
I grew up as the only son with three sisters, all older. My younger sister is 6 years old, 6, 8, and 9 years older than me. And now I have 2 little girls. And I have a 14-month-old and a 4-year-old who's about to turn 5. And when you think about this process, right, and why women, at least according to that research, tend to be so conscious about the process of it, there's a saying, right, is that women take care and then take charge, right? Whether that's good or bad, that's something we thought about for sure. But certainly the caring process, and I wonder about where that comes from. Care has a lot of layers to it, right? Care is, I care how we get there. I care about the people around me and how the process is for them, or I care about the risks and the outcomes and things along those lines. And I think about my oldest daughter, Hadley, who is about to turn 5, as I mentioned, and she is just as excited and wild as they come, right? She's a risk taker, and she's been that way since the day she was born. And I'll never forget this time when I was at the park with her, and the park was full on a Sunday. And she was climbing this ladder, and she would go 3 rungs up on the ladder, and she'd jump off, and people said, oh, you should be careful. And then she'd climb up 4 rungs, and she'd jump off, and people said, oh, she should be careful, where are her parents? I'm right there watching. She goes up 5 rungs, and she jumps off again, and people are just going, is someone going to stop her from doing this? And I say, absolutely not. Let her enjoy herself, because it's that type of restraint that we put on young women. Now, there are boys jumping off trees, right? No one's saying anything to the boy jumping off the trees. But watching this beautiful, talented, and energetic young girl jump off 5 rungs was almost disturbing to some. So we think about how the back end looks like, right? We were professionals, and why sometimes one of us takes so much care and one of us a little bit more of a risk taker. And I recognize just in a relatively short period of time how you see where this starts, right? And it starts so young, and you have the perception creating the outcome. The perception how this is too risky for Hadley trying to create the outcome at the end of the day. So one of the things I try to do, and I think certainly as professionals, we have the capacity, certainly as leaders on this panel and in the audience, is to encourage that risk taking.
Let's hear from Women of Color Charter member Ricardi Jackson.
I think in a lot of contexts, you will see that if you made everything equal, men and women actually probably lead a lot alike. And I was thinking about this because I was reading the literature and it talked about, this very transformative leadership of women, and that we are more nurturing and democratic and all of these things, and then that men are more top down, and that they are more focused on, being dictatorial and creating competition. And I'm on my 30th job in life. I know that because of the Georgia Bar, where I first started. And my first one was when I was 11. And I worked for my godmother at Orange Mound Bay Nursery School. And my godmother, Miss Brown, was about the most dictatorial, top down. You did not ask any questions. Almost every stereotype of the hard matriarch that you could imagine. Nobody questioned her, not the kids, not the teachers. And she told, and at school ran like you wouldn't believe. I've been looking for it ever since I had children. But, and then I think about the founder of my current firm, who is probably one of the most transformational leaders I have ever met. He insists on, as soon as a new attorney's come in, you're going to first chair a trial immediately. And we'll take that risk, and we'll put in particularly women, and we'll challenge judges on how they treat the women. So, it's to me, it's very interesting. I think when I think about, my initial thought was, all this literature is white, because I think about myself and I want to be nurturing and I want to be the kind of person, and I think a lot of that comes from being a mother, saying, I'm constantly trying to get my children to the place of independence, and I want to see the same thing with the associates I'm working with. I want you to just take the helm and you own it as quickly as possible. So I want to keep nurturing that. And even though it's a lot early on, it means hopefully later I do less. But when I actually look back at the leaders who I've seen in my life and I've watched in my life, I start to think about context. And it really does matter. I mean, Mrs. Brown was in her educational setting. It was a Black school in a Black community. Nobody was going to question her authority. And she ran that school like with an iron glove. And then when you think about, I've been also in big firms and some international law firms, and there were very few women leaders, and a few women leaders who were there understood their lack of power in that environment, and they had to modify their leadership skills and roles to fit in that context. And so it was more of a leadership by persuasion. And let me come to the table and be very, very prepared, because I know you're already going to underestimate what I can do and what I'm capable of doing and what I'm going to say. So I've got to be extra prepared, and I've got to be the one ready to do it. So I think leadership style is as much shaped by our context and where we have power as it is by our gender, probably. And certainly I don't, take away from life experiences. I do think there's some real socialized differences, and I really appreciate what you said, Greg, about your daughter, because as I look at my daughter, she is by far the one. I have two sons and a daughter. She is the born leader, and is dictatorial, and is bossy, and will tell everybody what to do. So, it's really interesting how we move from childhood to adulthood, and I think context has a lot to do with it.
Let's hear Andre Pierre's perspective on leadership differences.
I have a small, law firm in downtown North Miami, similar to the same kind of law firm that Michelle and Bernadette has here in Broward County. My leadership in that law firm is more, I would say, transactional kind of leadership, because a lot of times, I needed to get it done without the inspiration, without the inclusiveness, without looking at that kind of vision. But when you look at Michelle, with Bernadette up here, the same kind of, law firm, but her leadership is completely different than the kind of leadership that I bring into my workplace. But I see there's a great deal of problem going on in terms of teaching our young boys and our young girls the same kind of leadership that I see in politics. For example, you take the Miami-Dade County, you got 34 cities. Out of 34 cities, only 6 of them are leading by women. You have few cities that have 60% of the registered voters are women, but majority of the people that are sitting on the council are men, leading by mayors. Some of my friends that are sitting here, I have tried to get them to run for office, women, but a lot of times, they don't believe that they are ready to take that kind of leadership because they have never been taught to them. This is the kind of issue that I have seen in terms of men leading differently than men.
And let's listen to Gregory Hale.
There will be folks who look at me and they will decide before I open my mouth that I am not worthy. They will have decided that. So one of the things that I know that I can control, it's not about being accommodating, right? But one of the things that I can control is how good I am, how much information I have, how much knowledge I have, and the background that I build to today and through tomorrow, and make it as best as I possibly can. I'm confident today, I don't know what tomorrow brings, that I've given everything I can of myself to get to do what I'm doing, right? I don't want to be doubtful about that, right? I need to be relentless about that because I recognize very clearly there are people who are waiting to find a kink in the armor every time. And so with that, there's no doubt. I think about it routinely, and that's what oftentimes, like you said, pressure makes diamonds, right? It propels us to be the best.
Yvette Simmons had some really interesting reflections on kind leadership.
When I was president, someone made a comment and said that I was a Democratic dictator. And I thought about that, and what it meant was, as a woman, I listened. I listened to all of the issues. I absorbed everything. And then came up with a decision that where I wanted to go, but made a point of incorporating everyone's desires within that decision. Because I wanted to please everyone, because women like to please. We want to have results that will result in all of us getting along, as opposed to acrimony and jealousy and animosity. And then some people will say that they'll confuse kindness with weakness with us. Whereas I guess if a man did that, then they would say, "Oh, that's a gentle giant. How considerate of him. He's doing something. He's actually looking out for someone." But if a woman does that, then there's a sign of weakness.
Let's hear again from attorney Eugene Pettis.
We cannot be afraid of failing, because when you're going after leadership, when you're going after whatever your goal of success may be, there may be failure, but you got to have that confidence that I'm going to get up and I'm going to do it again. And Julia, it takes me back to law school when I was applying for jobs. In 84, 85, when I was coming out of school, no black folks were getting these big jobs. Holland and Knight down in Miami had 3. David Self, Joan Wilson, and Marilyn Holyfield. That was such a radical, Yeah, that was such a radical thing, because nobody was hiring very many in these major firms. So I would go put in the application and they would say, "Why are you doing that? You know they're not going to hire you." I'm saying, so if they don't, I'm going to be the same place where I am now. And I just kept doing it and kept doing it and kept doing it. I started getting interviews. I got hired. Lo and behold, it wasn't because I was the smartest. There were women. Phyllis Perry, back then, Phyllis Harris. Brilliant young lady, my colleague. She's now huge in Walmart. Brilliant. Way smarter than me. But she was afraid of putting that thing in there because of they're not going to hire you. And we need to be a little reckless in that regard. Go for it. And not be afraid. This is your daughter, Greg, going for it. And not worry about failure, because failure is just a part of the process.
Here again from Judge Michelle Childs.
Women, in my opinion, tend to be much more detailed in their planning, They also are people who wish to get the job done from a big picture level. So that takes a lot of planning and a lot of details, as you can see all the details even going on with planning on this conference. They like to also engage, which is very effective because there's a participatory leadership style in the sense that people will work with them, coordinate with them, and then they allow other people to rise as leaders within their project. They are also very comfortable, in my opinion, just being very approachable. And I'll tell you a little bit, all of us will probably talk about our perspective just from the standpoint of what we do. As a federal judge, I'll interview lots of people, and in fact, this was the first time I signed on to what we call a system called OSCAR, where you actually go online as a federal judge post. So this last year was the first time I did it, and I had over 200 applicants. It was very clear to me that women were so much more detailed in how they presented their resume. Of course, I'll check behind you and go on LinkedIn and your Facebook accounts and things of that nature just to kind of see who you are. And they didn't just have gaps all around.
Ricardi Jackson has very interesting comments on changing the environment to lead.
And I think both of you hit something, the nail on the head with so many of your comments, but one of the things that struck me was this notion in the literature about women bringing to their businesses and corporations benevolence and universalism. And benevolence being that caring about the people around you, and universalism being this notion of that all people matter and we need to care about everybody. And as you're talking about how important it is to be transformational, one of my sheroes, Lonnie Lanier, writes about the canaries in the mine, and she talks about the fact that, you know, oftentimes those of us on the fringes, the women, the minorities, we die first. We're the canaries, right? But the whole mine is poison. And if we don't change the mine, everybody dies. And so I think even the bigger point is that we have to transform, even beyond our own individual businesses or industries. We really need to be transforming the whole doggone thing. I mean, the environment needs to change. And it's not going to change until we bring some of that perspective and bring others along so that it becomes the norm. Because what happens now is we end up changing ourselves and trying to fit into a mode of a very poisoned system. And until we start to say, no, the norm needs to be much different than that, because it needs to have this perspective there, not just me being the lone voice or the trailblazer, which is, you know, we were just talking about how shameful it is to still be a trailblazer in this day and age. But we've got to make that more of the norm by saying, you know, we need women leaders not only because we have these qualities, but because we have to change the norm.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you for joining us. And until next time, be empowered.